Welcome to Harmony Hill's educational webinar on spring greens. My name is Elise Krohn and I am a wild foods educator and herbalist in Olympia, Washington. And I've studied nutrition from many cultural perspectives, and there are many things that food experts disagree on, but they all concur that we should eat more plants, and especially greens. But some of our greens are far more nutritious than others. Iceberg lettuce, the most common lettuce which is eaten in America, has been bred to taste really mild with almost no bitterness, but it's also extremely low in nutrients, about 1/40th that of dandelion greens. So when you shop at the grocery store, it's the greens that are dark green or purple or reddish that tend to be the most nutritious. So here you see a beautiful produce display with chard and kale and arugula, a lot of different colors. And the dark leafy greens are really loaded with minerals, which help us to build strong bones and hair and nails. And they also have vitamins and then antioxidants that are going to protect us from chronic diseases and help support our cardiovascular system. And dark leafy greens also really support our liver and our kidneys in detoxification. They just help us to clear waste products and prevent things like edema. And if you want to go for even bolder flavors and more nutrients, you can harvest some of your own greens. And this is actually really easy to do. The garden of edible plants is all around us, from our forests to our beaches to many of the weeds that are growing in our own backyards. And I have to say that nothing gives me greater pleasure than being able to get out there and forage my own food. It keeps me in touch with the seasons, and my senses become really attuned to what is happening in each season. So the first signs of spring, like the nettles emerging in February, and then followed by many of the tender salad greens like chickweed and sheep sorrel and miner's lettuce and violet. And as I get to know these foods, I recognize them wherever I go, whether I'm in cities or whether I'm out in the forest, and I begin to crave them. My body tells me when I need them. And there's something that is so gratifying about that, just getting out and harvesting your own food. And Northwest Coastal Native elders teach that seasonal foods are really important for our health, and that there are certain foods that actually help to support the change in season. So for example, when you eat spring nettles, they're going to support your liver and aid in detoxification like other dark leafy greens, and fortify you with nutrients that give you energy. And it's an important food after winter time because people tend to eat many more dried foods and fatty foods, and we're more sedentary. And so eating those seasonal foods when they're ripe and ready just aligns us with what's happening with the seasons and our own health. And nettles are really a superfood, incredibly high in chlorophyll, vitamins, minerals, and even protein and some amino acids. And you want to harvest them in spring while they're still young and tender, because as they get older, the stems become really fibrous and the leaves just become a little bit harder as well. So yes, they do sting, and you have to harvest them carefully with gloves or scissors. And you can see gloves here, and that they're only about 4 inches tall. Once they get much more than 8 or 10 inches, it's a little bit too late. And you want to make sure that you harvest them in a safe area that's not contaminated. So not near a roadside or an agricultural area or any place that's been sprayed. So once I harvest them, I'll pick them up with the scissors or pick them up with your gloves and put them right into a colander. Put them into a basket first, or a bag, and then bring them home, and I'll just dump that right into a colander. And then I rinse the nettles really well, and instead of chopping them with a knife, I chop them with scissors. This helps you to actually not get stung. And if you do get stung, there are many things that are out there growing with nettles that'll help ease the sting, including plantain and yellow dock, and even the underside of fern, the brown spores you can rub on the nettle sting. And it'll last anywhere from a couple hours to a couple days. But some people even intentionally sting themselves with nettles because it can help with arthritis. It helps increase circulation and enliven the tissue. So just know it'll go away soon. And there are many ways to cook nettles. Probably the easiest way is to boil them. And you can put those nettles right in boiling water, and they'll be like spinach in that they'll become much, much smaller. So you might have a big bag of nettles, and then once you boil them 3 to 5 minutes, you'll have a very small and incredibly nutrient-dense green. You can drink the water. So after you boil them, you're basically making a nettle tea, and you can save the water that the nettles have been boiled in for tea, or you can use it as a really delicious stock for soups. And then you can also saute nettles, and my favorite way to do it is with a little bit of garlic and onions, and then add the nettles, and I'll add a little balsamic vinegar at the end. And you want them to be completely cooked, of course, but they're delicious that way. You can also put them right into soup. So I like to make a potato leek soup or a squash soup, and I'll add the nettles in there and then blend it up into a really smooth soup. Or you can steam them. And some people like to can them. You can just follow the instructions for spinach. And I've even had friends can them with bacon and onions and garlic, and they're delicious. Once nettles get older, you can harvest them and make a tea out of them. And you want to harvest them before they go to flower. So they're much more vital before the flowers actually appear. And once you carefully pick them, I'll always leave a couple of leaves at the base of the plant. So you can cut them and leave those bottom 2 leaves or more. And that way the plant can come back and it'll actually grow back. And then I'll put them in a basket or bag, and when I get them home, I'll lay them onto big baskets, or I'll bundle them up with a rubber band and hang them up. And you can also put them in paper bags and then just flip the bag every day to make sure that they dry consistently. And once they're dry, they should be a beautiful green color and retain that smell. And you can strip the leaves off the stems once they're dried really easily, but make sure you use your gloves when you do that. And then you can store them in paper bags if you have a dry house, or in glass jars is a nice way to do it. And to make the tea, you just crumble up the leaves, and you use about 1 heaping tablespoon per cup of boiled water. And you steep it 15 minutes at least, and the longer that you steep nettles, the more minerals you're going to get out. So I like to mix half nettle and half peppermint. We call it peppy nettle tea, and I'll actually let that sit overnight. And then by morning, it makes a really nice mineral-rich brew. And you can drink it hot or cold. You can add sweetener if you like, and you can keep that tea in a jar in the refrigerator for up to 3 days. And you don't need to eat nettles every single day, but just eating them on a semi-regular basis can really make a difference in your health. So nettles are 29 times higher in calcium than spinach. And when you drink just 1 cup of nettle tea, you're getting about 300 milligrams of calcium. So drinking nettle tea or eating nettles a couple times a week can really fortify your diet. The next green that I like to harvest in springtime is chickweed. And you'll see chickweed coming up in gardens as a weed. It'll come up in fields, and even sometimes forest areas will have nice patches of chickweed. And chickweed, the Latin name is Stellaria, after star. And if you look closely at these flowers, they look like tiny little stars. And an even closer look, you can see that there are 5 petals, but each petal is divided so that it looks like rabbit ears. So you can pull the petals apart, and that's a way to identify it, is those rabbit ear petals. And then the other way to identify chickweed is that there's a single line of hair, almost like a fuzzy little mohawk that runs down the length of the stem. And there are a couple other lookalikes that you might see growing in your garden as weeds. One has red flowers, and the underside of the leaves is kind of spotted. And the other one is hairy all over the plant and just doesn't seem like something that you'd want to eat. Whereas chickweed is really lettuce-like. You know, it's very, very tender, and you want to harvest it before it goes to flower. before it goes to seed, because the older it gets, the more it becomes fibrous. So when it's young, the leaves are really large and the flowers are beautiful, and you can take scissors to cut it and put it right into your salads. So you want to rinse it first because nobody enjoys sand or dirt in their salad, but give it a gentle rinse. You can put it through a salad spinner, and then just add it to your salads. And I'll usually add, 25% chickweed and use a base green like a lettuce or other different kinds of wild greens to mix with it. And you can also make really delicious chickweed pesto. You can mix it with basil or other herbs. And I like to use walnuts, Parmesan cheese, garlic, and olive oil. And I'll just spread that on crackers or put it on sandwiches. I'll even freeze my pesto so I have it throughout the year. And you can also put chickweed into things like lasagna or omelets or quiches. It has a really nice, mild flavor. And chickweed is really a storehouse of nutrients. So it has 12 times more calcium than spinach and 5 times more magnesium, which really helps with muscle relaxation, 83 times more iron, which is really incredible, and then 6 times more vitamin C. So chickweed, one of the things that herbalists say is that it builds vitality through increasing our body's ability to absorb nutrients. And that is across our intestinal layer. So it's actually, in addition to giving us a lot of nutrients, eating chickweed helps us to absorb more nutrients from our other foods. So dandelion is probably the most common weed in America. Most of us have this growing in our yards. And it was actually brought here in the 1620s on the Mayflower as a food, and people planted it in their gardens. And it's quickly spread across the world. And every part of the dandelion is actually useful. So in early spring, the leaves will emerge. They kind of look like rockets shooting up out of the soil. And the French name for dandelion is Dandelion because you can see it looks kind of like lion's teeth as you're looking at the leaves. And you want to be careful. There are several lookalikes for dandelion. So the way to positive identify dandelion is that there is only one flower per stem. So you can see this yellow flower here with a long stem going all the way down to the base of the plant, and other lookalikes might have 5 or 7 flowers per stem. And then dandelion leaves are never hairy. Other lookalikes can have very hairy leaves. And so, of course, you can eat dandelion leaves, and in the early spring, they're really tender and delicious. A little bit bitter, but not too much. And that bitterness is actually an incredible medicine because when we taste bitter on our tongue, it stimulates our brain and sends messages to our whole digestive system to release digestive enzymes. So literally that taste of dandelion greens or other bitters is going to help increase hydrochloric acid in our stomach, pancreatic enzymes, and bile. And that's going to help us to break our food down better. So a little bit of bitter is great. And once dandelion greens get older and are exposed to more sun, they become increasingly bitter, which is not so pleasant. So I usually harvest them in the early spring. And if they're starting to get a little bit more bitter than my palate likes, then you can actually boil them. So boiling them in a big pot of water will help decrease the bitterness. And once they're boiled, you can eat them just like you would another cooked green like collards. I like to put a little bit of feta cheese on them and a little bit of vinegar and salt and pepper. And they have a really, really nice flavor. And you can also saute them. So just a gentle saute like you did with nettles. And then the buds start to appear, and the buds are edible, and you can see the little, it looks like a sepal or a little modified leaf at the base of the bud. And those are more bitter, and so I'll actually pull those off and just take the buds, which look almost like little watermelons. And you can put those in eggs or saute them. You can put them in spaghetti sauce. But my favorite thing to do with them is to make dandelion bud pickles. And so you want to get the ones that are pretty tight. When you squeeze them, they don't open up and you don't see that yellow flower bursting out. And I'll put them in a jar with a little bit of onions sometimes, garlic, and the herbs of your choice for flavor. I love rosemary. And then you can put any kind of vinegar over the top. And some people will even put a little bit of tamari or soy sauce in there and ginger to do an Asian flair. But cover it completely with the vinegar, put the cap on or the lid and put it in the fridge. And you don't even have to refrigerate them, but I like to eat them cold. And after about 2 weeks, they'll be ready, and they are delicious, and they'll last all year long, and it's a way to get some of those really wonderful nutrients. And dandelions are higher in vitamin A than any other garden vegetable, and you're going to get that from the flower, which is great for our eyes. Another way to use the flower is you can pick the dandelion. These are actually individual flowers. So what we think of as one dandelion flower is actually a bunch of flowers all together on one flowering head. And so you can pull those off the base, and then you can add them to breads, or my favorite is biscuits. And if the dandelion flowers are really long, then I'll actually cut them up with a knife and make them a little bit shorter. But I'll make my biscuits and add them right into the dry ingredients. And they are so delicious. You know, these biscuits, they're crunchy on the outside, but the dandelion makes them really fluffy and gives a really light floral flavor to them, and then adds nutrients. You can also make dandelion flower fritters. And I've pulled the little sepal-like leaves off the base of the flowering heads. And so they have a nice flavor just straight up. And I've mixed some eggs with milk and some herbs, whisked it up, and then flour you can add a little salt and pepper to. And so you dip it in the egg mixture and then dip it in the flour and coat it, and then saute it. And you want to use an oil that can withstand high heat. And I've even done this with coconut oil and used cinnamon and done them more as like a breakfast fritter. And we also call them dandelion poppers. But this is one of those foods that even the most wary wild foods forager will love. And then the last green that I'm going to talk about today is violet. And violets will come out as early as February, and often the earliest ones are incredibly fragrant. So you have to get down on your hands and knees and really smell them. And they have a smell like nothing else. So intoxicating. And you can tell violets, you can identify the flowers because they have two petals kind of pointing upward, two pointing down, and then one right in the center. And if you look up close, it often looks like there's a little landing strip for pollinators right at the base of that flower. And then the leaves of violets are usually heart-shaped. And here in the Pacific Northwest, we have purple, lavender, white, and yellow, and pink violets. So they come in many different colors. And even Johnny jump-ups, which will come up in many people's yards, and pansies are edible. And violets are delicious, and they're also really, really high in nutrients. In fact, one tiny little handful of violets has the same amount of vitamin C as a whole orange. And so I'll pick violet leaf and flower, because they're both edible, and put them right into salads. So here's a picture of a salad that has several different kinds of violets in it. And then I'll use the violets to decorate cakes or cupcakes, or put them in soups. And violet has been used in many places in the world. So China, Europe, throughout the Americas. And it has a very long-standing tradition in being a food, and you don't need to eat much of it. So just really a little handful of violets is great. This is something we just add in little bits. But violets are thought to be cooling and anti-inflammatory. And they actually have a little bit of salicylic acid in them. So that helps to reduce pain and inflammation. And they have a little bit of mucilage, which helps to soothe irritated tissue. And violets have been used historically to help dissolve tumors. So they're used as an adjunct therapy for cancer and fibroids and many other kinds of diseases where you want something that's cooling and anti-inflammatory and just generally sort of soothing and supportive. And so people will dry violet leaves and flowers in baskets and then make a tea out of them. And just a little handful of violets per cup of hot water steeped about 15 minutes. But my favorite thing is just to eat them. They're so beautiful, and they add just a really nice color and flavor to your dishes. And so I've included some additional resources here, and I've only talked about 4 wild greens, and there are so many that are out there. And I recommend going out with somebody who's an expert first, someone who really knows how to identify the plants so that you make sure that you have the right plant. There aren't very many plants that are toxic out there, but there are a few. And so you want to make sure that you know what you're foraging. And here on the right-hand side, you can see miner's lettuce. And at the bottom, you can see wood sorrel, which are both wonderful greens. And there are many, many more. And I hope that this has supported you a little bit in getting out and harvesting, and is a reminder that you don't need to eat these every single day, but just little bits, foraging some of your own greens when you're out on a walk or when you're in your backyard, and adding them to your meals on a regular basis can have a huge impact on our health. Our traditional diet, our modern diet, is so high in calories and low in nutrients. And so Americans, we eat the same foods over and over on a regular basis. And our ancestors, just a few generations back, ate many, many different types of foods. And those foods, often the wild foods, are incredibly dense in nutrients. And we really need that to stay healthy. I think that it can have a huge impact on your health. And so I hope that you can get out there and harvest some of your own foods, which are also incredible medicines.